Hello and welcome to the Captain Bob Flight Sim Podcast. Today we have SkyShed. He's an Instagram person who does a lot of stuff with the Cessna 172. I probably butchered the introduction, so what do you actually do?
That's a good question. That's a big life question. No, it's SkyShed for me is just, my real name is Paul rather than Sky. But no, it's just a hobby. It's much like I've been into flight simming since I was young, very young. And it's kind of revived itself over the last couple of years. I actually started building a 172 cockpit, much like yourself, around about the same time, a few years ago. I can give you the long and boring version or the abridged version, depending on what you want. But the goal really is just, it's a personal hobby. It's non-commercial for me, but it's all about kind of learning and having fun and building something really cool and saving on the enormous amounts of money required to fly a real one.
Exactly. What do you say to people when they're like, you're putting all of this money into the simulator, you could just buy a plane?
Yeah, that is common. I used to know pilots and sort of work with them a lot. And there was one in particular, and he would say that all the time, like, what's the point? You might as well just have lessons. That, potentially that may be true. Lots of flight simmers out there, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with it. But, they'll buy a lot of kit and they'll buy pre-made hardware, or they'll buy some really expensive kind of bits and pieces to build things themselves, kits and those kind of things. And that's awesome because they can look good and they can feel good, and you don't have to have the hassle of making them. But yeah, you could really get a big deal at the end of that. I mean, you could be talking probably paying the same amount as you would for commercial training. If you're looking at, say building a 737 or something like that, as a lot of people do, yeah, awesome, but that is going to cost some serious money. But a GA sim for me, I've look at your YouTube stuff a lot. As I said just before this, I think you're awesome. I love what you're doing. All the multitasking, all the crafts that you take on, as well as the tutorials, is top notch. But I've kind of approached it in a similar way to you by the looks of it, which is I've kind of take what I have, take the materials that are available to me, and do everything really as cheaply as possible. Yes, you have to buy bits of plywood, you have to, buy some expensive encoders or whatever once in a while, and there's money involved. But when I was doing my lessons, which I kind of had to knock on the head at least temporarily, but the money going out is astronomical on real flying. And the money on this in the meantime as a stopgap is next to nothing, relatively speaking. It's just materials. And I'm kind of making it up as I go along and improvising. And the actual cost really isn't high. I don't do spreadsheets and stuff like that. I don't want to take the joy out of it. But, people saying to me, oh, why do you bother? It's just not worth it. It's too expensive. That's absolutely not the case. Like you, I've built this thing once already and then kind of torn it down. It's like, no, this is going to be better. This must be better. So I'm on kind of version 2 now. But version 1, it was pretty cool to sit in it and use it, and it looked good, and it felt good, and it's visceral, and there's like real buttons and knobs that do stuff, and this is not like just putting Flight Simulator on your computer with a SciTech yoke or some basic stuff or whatever, which is fine, but this is next level when you get in it, isn't it? Oh, you get in it,
Absolutely.
Stuff works, and you've made it, and then when stuff doesn't work. So what? You've made it. You know exactly how to fix it, and that's cool. I like that.
Exactly. With flight training, something that's really annoying is you spend a certain amount of money every week or twice a week or however frequently you flight train, and then once you stop, that just it plummets. But you have to get back into it, and you have kind of the sludge with it. So I personally also took a break from flight training, maybe indefinitely. I'm not sure how when or if I'll get back into it, just because it's so
No.
expensive.
It is so expensive. I hope you can. I hope I can too. But, I did work around vintage airplanes for a long time. And I'm from kind of a normal, if you like, background, like a working class, upbringing. And there's no doubt about it. Flying really is for, people with a bit of money to spend, a lot of money to spend, or a lot of privilege behind them or whatever. And it's hard to keep that up because when you do train to fly a real, even for a PPL, you're getting a license to spend money, as I call it. You happen to be flying planes as well, but when you're qualified, it's like, right, congratulations, you can now spend this much money every year of your life to keep flying. And it is hard. And with me, I'm self-employed, so I kind of, when the pandemic hit and everything else, it was just, although I could afford to carry on flying, I felt it wasn't sensible. It was just like, this is crazy. It's like turning on a tap and the money's coming out. So, I was very fortunate because when I worked around the planes, I was getting a lot of hands-on time that I wasn't paying for. So I can't knock it. That was awesome. So, and when I did that, I visited lots of workshops, and I saw lots of vintage airplanes, effectively in bits. And they're so kind of rudimental, it's quite incredible if you see something like a Tiger Moth or a Stearman or something being built, and you realise, it's a subframe and some pulleys and it's all the kind of engineering that you and I are mucking about with to build our own stuff.
Yeah.
Or it's similar to model planes as well, if you ever built those. And it really kind of sparked my interest just hanging around those workshops and seeing these real planes. You're flying in them 1 minute and then they're like a Meccano set the next. Do you have Meccano in the States? I don't know.
Oh, no, the little things where you like screw them together with
it's like Lego but
and stuff.
Metal.
Yeah, we have one of those.
So these planes kind of look like that, and you get to see how simple they are, and it's fascinating. And I got kind of hooked on that. So when that stuff came to an end for me, I just kind of, there was a gap and there was this weird pandemic and everything else. And I thought, I want to build stuff again. And over the years, I've dabbled. I think you've done something similar, like occasionally I've built just this like really basic throttle quadrant or something, out of some cardboard boxes and wooden dowels, and, a hacked joystick actually was my first one, where I'd taken, gone old school and kind of didn't have Arduinos and stuff like that then. So I dabbled years ago, but this time, and with your help, because I saw a few of your videos, I thought, I'm going to go for it now. I'm going to build a cockpit in the loft. I know it doesn't fit. In my loft, but I'm building it anyway.
Yeah. So, answer those questions later.
Yeah, exactly. And that's a large part of it. It's working it out as you go along. It's, you constantly hit things. And then I built it the first time and then I loved it, loved the Cessna, but I want more from it. So, and you make so many mistakes that first time round. I'm now building it like you, with really again. And at the moment, my cockpit's coming together. You may have seen on my Instagram thing. I'm kind of building it. It's very different to yours. Yours, you've got this beautiful modular system, and I love it. If I had the space, I would definitely go the same way. But my space in the loft doesn't accommodate that kind of building, and I have to think about weight as well. So it's like, so I'm building it in a modular way, but I've got the two halves of the panel this time. So I've got the top half with the gauges, and then the bottom half, with all your throttles and all the bits and pieces. So it's still all to scale like yours, and I want it to be really authentic. I want every switch to be there, and I want them all to work. but mine kind of will kind of bolt on to a framework that I've done a lot of woodwork in the loft to kind of make this surround that it all fixes to, which isn't the shape of a real plane, but it doesn't matter in terms of
Yeah.
the experience. But where I'm a bit torn at the moment is the first time round, I built the cockpit, and a lot of it for me has been about the computers as well, because I wanted to go all out. I had a lot of old computer parts because of what I do, and I was trying to set up 4K televisions, so really impressive surround, visuals, and it worked. And when I took this little phone video of my first cockpit, I couldn't believe how kind of realistic it looked. But in a sense, it looked more realistic on my phone clip than it did to me sitting in it. And that's because I had the sides of the aeroplane in like virtual cockpit mode. So looking forwards, you had the prop and the cowling and all that, looked awesome. And then looking out of the side, you've got the side of the fuselage on screen rather than being a real thing. And I think what I really want this time round is to kind of build that fuselage effect. I can't build it like you are, but I want a door, and maybe that screen sort of in that door rather than having them all sort of perfectly aligned to go around. So what I want this time is ambitious, and it's going to take a long time, but my fear is if I build this thing, I don't want to think I prefer the first one.
Yeah, that's definitely something you should make sure to fix.
Yeah. So, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Do you like the idea of kind of virtual cockpit views for the sides, or?
I think it's fun, really fun to have the fuselage, even if it technically looks worse than the modeled airplane, but just because you can feel the walls and you're like, wow, I'm in something. I'm in a plane. I feel like
I totally agree.
that's gonna
And
be
I
really
like all
awesome.
the kind of the physical effects. So I've put my speakers are sort of inside. My chair is mounted on a box, and then I've got 4 speakers, and 2 of them are inside the box, so you can feel it, like through your bum and through your back, and it goes up. So you turn out nice and loud, and then as you increase the revs, you can feel it through your body as you do in a real Cessna, obviously, especially an old one. So I like all that stuff. But when you've got the fuselage on screen, if you choose to go that way, you've got these beautiful light effects as you're flying around, the shadows and lighting effects on the fuselage, which you can't have if you build a real fuselage.
That's true.
Yeah, trade-offs, isn't it?
Yeah, I wasn't thinking about that. Off the lighting effects. I'm gonna see if I can make an artificial sun or something and have it.
I've had those thoughts. Yeah, you and I are similar kind of crazy, Trevor, because
exactly.
Yeah, I've got a lot of things sort of on the back burner, but things I would really love to achieve further down the line are things I think you're already doing. That dual yoke thing you're doing I love that. That's fantastic. And the holy grail for me is to make a good force feedback yoke and a good set of pedals. But they're way down the line for me. I've got too much, that comes before that. But yeah, I mean that's really, I suppose, the goal, the dream, if you like, and to do it all cheaply.
Yeah. Oh, we have, as you said, we're similar crazy. Those are. I really want to do that too. It's so cool.
The first time I built it, it's the biggest sort of problem was where it's all problem solving as you go along. I mean, probably to a lot of people, this all looks daunting. And I guess it is if you're not of a certain mindset. But I had to learn a lot of patience as I went along, because the first thing I really missed was not using the simulator. I was spending so much time building that it's never ready to have a go on. So if you have a day where you just think, yeah, I just want to fly around and see what this thing feels like, it's more often than not actually functional, to do
True.
that. So you have to kind of get to grips with that, and then you have to, I think, do it at a pace that works for you, because I don't know if you're the same, but you can open these great wormholes and you can go off on massive tangents. You start one project here, and then you look over there and there's something else calling you, and you start that, and then life gets in the way and you have to do life stuff. So you don't look at it for a couple of weeks or maybe a month, and then you go back and you don't know what you were doing last time, and it can be hard. And then you kind of relearn things you've already messed up once, which is annoying. So you need to be efficient with it. And for me, when I built my first cockpits, I cut too much material away, because where you've got that kind of subframe on your Cessna, and you built those, I haven't got CNC machines and, all that kind of stuff. So mine's all built sort of by hand, hand tools and, a few basic sort of saws and, bits and pieces. But so for me, it's like I started with a nice piece of ply or something, MDF, I think actually the first one was. I've got confused. I built so many, I don't know. But then as I kept kind of tweaking and improving, and then finding out things I needed to fix, before I knew it, this thing was weak. And it looked good, but you picked it up to do something on it, and it was buckling in the middle and stuff. And then you patched up something here, and you're putting wood filler in to improve it. And it ended up a bit of a Frankenstein's monster. And it started to bother me at that stage, and I thought, no, I want better than this. So this time around, I'm trying to build it as a really strong, proper sealed unit thing that will just live there and not break itself. And if I move house or something, I can just take it with me without, dismantling it and stuff. That's what I'm trying to do.
It reminds me a lot of my first simulator, because you'd like sit down in it and the sides would like wiggle. It was so bad.
Yeah, I don't like that. That's a big deal for me, taking that motion, that kind of wiggle out of everything. I found on my first desk that I built up there, there was motion, so if you're pulling the yoke hard or something, because I use honeycomb yoke, which I've modified. And if you pull that hard, it was sort of rocking the desk and stuff. And those are the kind of things that destroy the immersion, I think, if you're trying to build a sim. You don't want distractions. And like the second something in your brain doesn't feel right, then it doesn't feel realistic. From someone watching from the outside, definitely with my cockpit, they'd probably think, yeah, that looks all right. But when you're sitting in it, it looks more than all right. It actually feels quite real. So those kind of, if something suddenly creeps in that isn't realistic, it destroys the experience. So I want that real sort of firmness through the controls, and the right spring, and the right kind of, on the throttle and the carb heat and all these different things that I'm trying to model. I want them to have the right amount of play and, to feel good and to the best of my ability. I think you're probably more thorough with some of your things than I'm trying to be, because with some of the controls that I'm actually making, there's kind of a point with the realism where I think it's not necessary. It is a flight simulator, and I want to do so many things. You've got to know when to stop with all the individual projects, and so I want it to visually look fantastic and mostly be fully operational. But I don't want to get too hung up on it absolutely must be correct. Because, might as well just go and buy a real one.
Yeah. But sometimes it can be fun. I have so much. I'm. That's probably way smarter than what I'm doing, because I'll take like probably half the time designing the first like 90%, and then half the time designing the other like 10% that no one will ever see.
Yeah.
So I think
You
that's
got to
like,
have a big picture, haven't you? I think of what
mhm,
you're trying to achieve, because probably my biggest mistake, and what I would say to anyone else to thinking about having a go, is kind of make your mind up about what you want.
mhm,
Because the worst thing for me was at the time when I was having lessons, I was in a 152, and my flight simulator was really helping me. If I'd have a lesson, I'd come home and recreate it. I had these three 4K screens, it was working great. And I could, with the right scenery, fly where I flew in the real thing and do the lesson again. And then I'd go back and, I was saving a lot of money because I was getting practice effectively
mhm.
after the real lesson. So when I suddenly thought pandemic came, lockdown, and all that stuff, and I thought, I'm going to build this cockpit now. I wanted a 152 because it was working with the lessons that I was
Mhm.
having. It felt good. I was really, learning where the controls were and everything. But when I started making the 152, I changed my mind, more or less. Well, I did a lot of work and then I changed my mind and I thought, I'm going to all this effort to build a sim aeroplane. And it's so basic because it's a 152. I could be building at least a 172 and then have, the GNS 430 and all that kind of stuff. So as my learning, because I want to learn to fly the thing as well. I don't only want to build it. I want to, use it as a tool. Um, so kind of having a few more complex systems in the plane is important to me as well. So anyway, I kind of scrapped all the 152 stuff, but ended up with this kind of hybrid. Some of it was to 152 spec, and some of it was 172 spec. And then if you start going those routes, you get frustrated and you get a bit disappointed. And I think best off just making a decision and having goals and working through them. And then when something goes wrong, go back and put it right and then move on.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that just me? What do you think?
No, I think it's really good to like, even the sunken cost fallacy. Everyone will be like, "Well, I invested so much effort into this," or like, I've been doing this for a while." Oh, I think it cut off.
I don't know what happened.
Me
You
either.
just started going all like, just garbled and disappearing, and then you froze.
Oh no.
Edit that out. They'll never know.
I guess I guess I must have just not liked your question because
I do tend to ramble on a bit. So, if you want to just pretend that the internet's broken and just cut me off. I think we were talking about how, you start off with one set of goals in mind and then something takes you off, something goes a bit wrong, or you kind of have these new ideas about how you want the next thing and the next thing. And then before you know it, you're not sticking to your original plan. And you can end up with this kind of hybrid of designs. And you have elements of the build that work together, and then elements that are detached from the rest of the build that shouldn't be. And when I did my first one, I had a throttle quadrant that I was very happy with. I mean, it was rough and ready. It was kind of, PVC pipe and
Mhm.
wood and some sliding potentiometers and some springs and stuff. And it worked, and I was very happy with it at the time. So when I came to build the cockpit, I just integrated it. But it wasn't a smooth way of doing the build, because I just took this thing that I built a couple of years ago and I whacked it into the thing that I've
Mhm.
just built now. And I kind of, chopped things away to accommodate it and whatever. And I think probably that was a mistake for me. And on the second time around, I'm trying to sort of think ahead and design parts that all go together and are much more simplistic. So one of the things I learned from my friend at the time at the airfield was the way they kind of approach technical problems on aeroplanes, on old aeroplanes. It kind of drew to my attention that a lot of the stuff, my way of thinking, is overkill. And with the real planes, you don't over engineer something because it adds weight
Hmm.
or it adds too much time or it adds, other factors in or whatever. You need to when you're solving these kind of engineering problems. And by the way, I should add, I'm not an engineer. I barely know what I'm talking about here, so I'm not pretending I do know. But I like this stuff, so I'm trying to learn. But it's kind of it's putting the correct amount of effort and time and materials into the job, depending on what it needs to do. If it doesn't need to, sustain 50 kilograms of pressure, don't build it, to sustain that. You don't need to. So now my throttles and my sliding bits and pieces are all kind of, 3D printed, really lightweight, incredibly simple designs. And now I get a kick out of their simplicity.
Hmm.
Whereas when I started out, it was kind of more about, perhaps over engineering everything, and everything, must be big and bulky and good enough to go in a real plane or whatever.
That was hilarious.
This is really difficult, isn't it? The planets just do not want us to be
Nope.
communicating.
But
It's not like we're talking about Russia or anything, is it?
Mhm.
I think what it might be here is this. I just got your invite, and it's from Zoom US, and I'm using Zoom UK, I presume, and it seems to be limiting. I think that one, the first one was a glitch, and the second one was a time limit. I
Yeah,
think.
I think so.
Yeah.
Huh.
Anyway, sorry. I apologize.
Oh no, it's fine. It's hilarious.
More editing for you.
Yeah, I have to like press like 6 more buttons.
That's
Thanks,
right.
Paul.
Exactly. First you were born, and now this. What were we speaking about?
This time, I think it was about making design simple and elegant.
Yeah,
And
that's right. Yeah. Yeah. I found a real pleasure. I don't know if you feel the same, but just in the simplicity, if I can make something that feels good, looks good, and is a really simple design, it's nice, feels good.
Mhm.
You like that? Trying to achieve that thing.
Yeah, yeah. I just took like a radio stack, and originally it was supposed to be a piece, a button, and then a little button holder. And then you screw the button holder into the button, into the button piece, into the faceplate. And then I just barely made it so that there's just a little like place that the button rests. It's built into the piece, and so it's just one piece, and you plop the buttons in there. And it took
Yeah,
out like 4 pieces, and it's like,
yeah,
what? Why
that
didn't
is
I
fun.
do that? So yeah.
Yeah, it's I'm really going that kind of route because one thing I loved about the first one, the first Cessna build that I finished was I set out, I can't quite remember why, but I set out not to do it like everyone else does. That's
Mm,
kind of a bit
yeah.
typical of me. I am a bit odd, if for want of a better word, in that way. I do tend to work everything out on my own as I go. And probably if I looked into more resources beforehand, I would probably see that lots of these things have been done before, and people have encountered problems and stuff. But it's not how I like to learn. I like to actually just really understand what I'm doing. So I tend not to follow tutorials or stuff like that. I just get stuck in. And I did kind of end up reinventing the wheel a bit as I went along because when I started out, I thought, I'm not going to get Air Manager. I don't want to pay them
Hmm.
80 quid or whatever it was.
Yeah.
Some very high amount, I thought, and do those kind of things. And I saw your tutorials on MobiFlight and those kind of things. And I thought, well, this looks good because this looks like an affordable alternative. But I still didn't go with it because the idea of kind of having bulky monitors and which I didn't have at the time, and these kind of things, to run the avionics just didn't really appeal to me. So the space that I had in the loft at that time, or SkyShed as I call it, but it's actually a loft, um, was even more limited. So I basically chose to use iPads for the gauges because I had a couple laying around, and I had iPad 2s, so they're old, but you can buy an Air Manager app for the iPad, which is a fraction of the cost. I think I paid about £7 or something like that. And it's clunky and it's buggy. It's not great, but if you take your time with some workarounds, you can still basically get full-size instruments using just iPad screens. So there's a bit of alchemy involved in that, because iPad screens aren't big enough to give you full-size gauges. And if you use multiple iPads, you can't get the spacing right for your gauges because the bezels on the iPads are so wide, it all goes wrong. So the way I worked around that was I bought one of those adapters, those Apple adapters, so you can go from your iPad 2 to a larger screen. What are they, like just a video adapter, like HDMI type thing. I had an old computer monitor, so then with some like really basic maths, literally like a ruler and a calculator, I worked out how big or small I had to make these gauges on the iPad screen in order for them to scale up after you'd connected your monitor via the adapter to the correct size. So once I worked out the method for doing it, I was very pleased with myself, and it worked and it looked great. And what I liked about it is when I got into the cockpit, I didn't have to boot up a computer. I didn't have to think about Arduino. Didn't do any of that. I got into the cockpit and I basically made like a little aperture in the cockpit so that you could put the home button for your iPad. You could press the home button for your iPad. So it all sprung to life. And then using the accessibility features of your iPad, which is designed for people with disabilities and things like that, you could basically start the Air Manager app just at a random point by touching a random point on the screen. Mm-hmm. So I made an icon for Air Manager and sort of placed it within the aperture of my altimeter or something like that. So you could just click that, it all booted up, and it was there and it was running, and it connected on the network flawlessly and everything. And I was chuffed with myself because I didn't want to build I've already got 3 computers because I wanted 3 4K screens. Mm-hmm. Didn't want a 4th computer. So I set out to do it, with the iPads, and I achieved that goal. So I do like that, but I did hit limitations. And then what I couldn't do was get the spacing between the engine instruments and the primary instruments correct because of that bezel problem. I had an iPad mini next to an iPad, and there's no way around it. There's too much space there, And it's such a simple thing. It shouldn't bother you, but it's just where you're trying to build something that feels really realistic. It did bother me. And then there were other bits and pieces, about using the Air Manager app that I wasn't so happy with. And I hadn't thought ahead at that stage about the radio stack. I do want a radio stack, but it had taken me so many months to build what I'd done that I wasn't even thinking ahead about radio stacks. It's like, oh, whatever, I'll work that out when I get to it. And then when I got to it, I thought, you know what I need? Air Manager on a fourth PC. I could have thought that, right back at the start. So I kind of reinvented the wheel, and that's maybe a bit annoying. Perhaps it's good. I learned stuff, and I kind of did something that, as far as I'm aware, no one else in our little community on the web has tried. So that was cool to do that. But probably made more work for myself along the way, I guess.
I think that's kind of how we learn sometimes. If you reinvent the wheel, really every detail about it, and you really understand how it rotates. So I sometimes reinvent the wheel, only to figure out there's a reason that type of wheel isn't invented. And it's really fun
Yeah.
to like just kind of
I can
learn.
really relate to that. Yeah. I think that's part of being an engineer, though. I mean, if
Mhm.
are you working towards engineering as a career
I
or
am,
something? Or
yeah, mechanical aerospace.
awesome. I wish you well. I mean, you'll be great at it, but you've seemed to have that problem solving mentality that you need, which you just nailed it. You know, in what you said just then, you sometimes you do reinvent the wheel so that you understand, you know, why it wasn't made in a different shape to begin with. You know, and that's sort of an important part, isn't it, of getting engineering skills and, you know, learning to problem solve enough to build a Cessna in your
Mhm.
garage or your loft.
Yeah. Uh,
So yeah, that's been fun. But the revelation for me was buying a 3D printer.
Absolutely.
Um, Up to that point, everything had been woodwork, and I know you're really good at that too. I can do it. I picked up those skills really from my dad because he was always good at that stuff. But you go so far with it, and then the problem for me approaching building a cockpit out of wood entirely was that you just can't get the accuracy.
Hmm.
I know with your stuff you laser cut things, don't you, and CNC
Yeah.
things. That's brilliant. If you can do that, you get that perfect accuracy. I can't do that, but I get round the accuracy problem now with my 3D printer. So my switch panel, for example, you know, rather than take a piece of ply and then like drill out all the holes for all the switches that I did the
Mm.
first time, as I did the first time, and then the circuit breakers and everything else, you are never going to get those perfectly spaced doing it by hand in a piece of wood because it just doesn't work like that. And maybe if you got like really good pillar drill and all that stuff in
Hmm.
your garage, maybe. But doing it with more conventional things, you'll always have a millimeter here and a millimeter there. And then when you put it all together, it looks a bit, I don't know. Well, to my eyes, I'm a bit disappointed with it. So bought 3D printer. It was on eBay and it's an Anycubic one. It's like an entry level sort of thing, I think, thereabouts. And I don't know what I paid. I think it was about £150 or something. You know, it's not a tiny amount of money, but it's also not going to break the bank. It's less than a flying lesson.
Exactly.
Um, and that changed everything because it's really efficient. I print loads of things out of one roll of, you know, of material, and then so I'm doing my fascias for my switch panel on there, and all of the holes are perfectly aligned. And in doing that, I learned a new skill, and I thought, you know what, I really like CAD, and I'd never even done that. I mean, when I was at school, we didn't get the opportunity to do anything like that either. So these are all new kind of skills to me. I'm into computers, and they're a big part of my work. So I'm good with computers, and I build them and all that. You know, I can build them. I don't do that for a living, but I can do that stuff. Um, but I'd never done stuff like CAD.
Hmm.
And getting the 3D printer, I mean, I still use a program. I don't know if you've heard of it, but it's called Tinkercad. And
Ah,
it's the most basic kind of
definitely.
CAD program. You know, they do use it in schools. And I love it because it's like, I don't want to be bogged down. I do, you know, a lot of software in what I do for a living. I have to have all knowledge on
Hmm.
lots of different complicated programs. I don't want to do that again in CAD for my hobby. That just feels like work. So I use Tinkercad, which is free and it's like an online portal thing. And I've designed hundreds of parts for my simulator just in that. And then, you know, when they come out printed, you have to learn new things like how to finish
Hmm.
them well. And that's hard. I still haven't mastered that. And I've got a cheap printer as well, which probably limits, you know, the quality that I can ultimately produce. But it's way better than when I was producing everything out of wood, and it's good enough. Once I'm still at the stage at the moment, like on my Instagram account, where all my photos are showing everything, you know, in bare wood, and it looks rough. But I know once that gets primed and painted at the end, that's going to look
Hmm.
really nice. I'm going to really be pleased with it. But this time around, I'm holding out on the finishing. The first time around, I got excited and it's like, oh, I like this. I want this to be done now. So I painted it, and then after I painted it, I thought, you know what, this is not rigid enough. It needs a support here and it needs something there. And then I start destroying the paintwork. So it's that thing of kind of being patient and doing everything
Hmm.
in the right order, isn't
Yeah. I already painted mine.
it? Oops.
Oops. Yeah. It's it looks fun though. And I think I'll just repaint it at the end.
Yeah,
So
that's fine
yeah.
too. I mean, it's different for me because it's a loft thing. I can't paint it up there where I
Ah,
am.
that's true.
Have you got a workshop or something or a
Uh
garage?
we do it in the garage, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's ideal. I'd love that. But for where I am, I can't really be spray painting and stuff in the
Hmm.
loft. It would be chaos. So I have to kind of do it in the right order so that I bring it down, take it outside, and paint it up, and then hopefully it goes back in the loft permanently and doesn't. Because if I trying to carry it up and down a ladder and stuff, it's liable to get broken.
Yeah.
So I mean, recently I'm currently in a small crisis with it. I haven't had much time to work on it recently, which is a shame because of work, but it was looking good and I was getting close to that stage of, right, let's get this thing painted. Um, and this time around, I thought I was being clever. So I designed a system for mounting the screen in the back for the gauges by sliding it in. Because I try and
Hmm.
make everything modular. I try and make
Yeah.
everything so that when it needs fixing, it comes apart easy and you can just service it and get it up and running again. So I thought, yeah, this is really smart. I'm going to slide this screen in. Um, but it wasn't so smart. It was better on the first cockpit that I made, where I just did a bolt-on design because the slide-in design is fine unless your wiring in your routed
Oh.
channels at the back comes out a bit, which is what happened with mine. So as I slid the screen out, it basically tore, some of the wires off the
Ooh.
encoders at the back. And a mistake I made along the way, which was a money thing, I didn't want to buy more wire. I was fed up with spending money.
Ooh.
And I had loads of wire in yellow. So I wired the whole thing in yellow because that's what I had. Because I had this really nice thin wire, and I thought, yeah, this is good. Won't be a problem. I know what I'm doing. I know which are the earths and which are the 5 volts or whatever, which I did. But sliding the screen out, basically, I've now ripped a few of those wires out, and
Oh.
I'm thinking they're all yellow. What do these? Where do I
Oh
need to?
no.
So it's like, I suppose these are the kind of things you learn to navigate.
Hmm.
True. But so I've kind of gone backwards a few steps, and I've now got to sort of get my encoders all working again, and then after that, once it goes back together, I'm really happy with it now. It's this beautiful kind of solid box, and it works, and and it's strong, and I'm pleased with it. But as I'm sure each of these stages in these projects takes so much longer
Yeah.
than you originally think. So I was, anyone out there thinking about starting it, you've got to kind of know that it's going to be a big commitment.
Hmm. Yeah. I'm always like, oh, it'll take me like probably 20 hours to design this instrument. That's like, yeah. And then I'm like, that's a high estimate. I like doubled it already. And then I get doing it and I'm like, wow, this is crazy. There's everything everywhere. And I'm like, what? So yeah, it takes a long time, probably like usually 30 or 40 for like a single instrument, and then they're like 20.
Oh, I can well believe it. I mean, as I said before the meeting with you, you're putting so much effort into documenting it for other people and sharing all this information so people can learn. You've got a YouTube channel, podcast, and all these different things. And this is time consuming stuff. I mean,
Hmm.
in its own right. So you're doing, 3 or 4 times the input. Each time you're making something, you're also documenting it. And I can only imagine the amount of time that you must put into this hobby. It must be massive.
Yeah, it is pretty massive.
Yeah, must be your life. So, yeah, well done for that.
Thank you.
But, I'd had visions of really sort of having it finished by now. But no, that's not realistic. I think even building a 172 or any other GA sim, if you want it to be pretty realistic and have most of the controls mapped and for it to look reasonably good too, and if you want a good computer system for the visuals and you want those visuals to work well, you're going to have to expect this project to take years, aren't you? Several years, which is sad, but that's life.
Yeah. But they won't be years wasted. They're very enjoyable.
Yeah. And you probably never finish this hobby. It's the nature of it, and it's the nature of people that do it, is that you build it and then you'll want something else. You'll want to improve something, or probably my fantasy with it, I'd like to I started my flying lessons on an old tail wheel Piper Cub, and they model that in Flight Simulator and X-Plane and these kind of things. And I've already started thinking, Piper Cub cockpit, because very simple. It's like, that really appeals to me. And I haven't even finished this one, nowhere near. So then I got thinking a while back, like, what I need is a rotating platform. So I set up my screens and I have this wraparound visual system. And then I haven't even got the house for this. I can't do this. But Fantasyland, I have a rotating platform on the ground with the 172 cockpit one side and the Piper Cub on the other. And I just rotate it depending on what I want to fly.
Brilliant.
You do them back to back and then just rotate it around to face the screens.
That's genius.
Awesome.
I'm feeling like a 747 today. Spin it around.
Exactly. Turn it around.
Let's spin the wheel.
I don't know. I suppose it's just part of the crazy that you have to take on such a massive hobby. But it's fulfilling, isn't it? So
yeah. I've seen so many people work for probably a decade and a half on their simulator, and then they look inside of it and everything is just perfect and they can't fix anything because it's all almost the actual airplane, if not the actual airplane. And then they're like, I want to put it on stilts and it's gonna move.
Yeah, so exactly. It never ends. It becomes an addiction, doesn't it? I suppose.
Yeah.
But, I mean, people. I know you've interviewed some of the other major people out there that are building 737s, and I just don't know how they do it. It's remarkable, some of the stuff.
Absolutely.
It's remarkable. It's well impressive. I like to. What I'm doing is relatively simple, I suppose, but I want to do it well. But the concept of building an airliner, I'd love to have a go in that. Yeah, absolutely. But these people that have some serious machinery to build these kind of airliner cockpits so well, so authentically as well. I must admit, with some of them, I look at it and I think that is incredible. But for that level of kind of expense and effort and time, I don't know. I couldn't have the patience and for that commitment. So hats off to them for doing that. Yeah, there's some seriously clever people out there. But I want to, with your stuff as well, what I love is how you've you go deep into the programming side, don't you, and the kind of software side as well. And one thing, a project for my future, once I've got this cockpit installed, is I want to go to your whiskey compass thing that you made, because that really appeals to have a proper working, servo powered compass. Love the thought of that, and I love your your relay
Oh, circuit breaker.
circuit breakers. That's clever. Love
Ah.
that. But I'm not so. The electronics side is my weakest side, so that really is kind of learning as I go for me. So very often with my projects, I mean, maybe some people that maybe our viewer out there who hasn't started yet, may one day think, I'm going to give this a go, but I know absolutely nothing about electronics and I could never do it. Well, I would say, I felt like that really very much, and I still largely do. But I'm making these things pretty confident that I will work it out at the time, how to wire it up. And because as you know, there's software that does a lot of this stuff for you if you want to go that route. In my case, I've now bought an Air Manager subscription. I've given in and given them my money, but it does what I need to, it does what I wanted to do. It makes it understandable for me. And I'm not scared of making a GNS 430 now,
Oh, good.
because I can make the buttons, make the enclosure. My GNS 430 is going to have an iPad as the screen, and then I'm going to basically run that via an app connected to the PC and run it as an extra screen from there. And then the program will be done, in my case, in Air Manager. So there'll be tons of things that go wrong and things to sort, but with minimal kind of electronics experience, I know that it's achievable. So, and seeing what you're doing, with the relays and all that kind of thing, that's quite inspiring for me to. I'll probably take it next level and try some of that stuff one day as well.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm hoping my thing is all built on X-Plane. Is yours on X-Plane or Flight Sim?
Mine is on Flight Sim 2020,
Yeah.
but I'm hoping to have it cross-compatible so you can hook it up
that
with anything.
That shouldn't be a problem, should it? I mean, with me, I desperately want to switch to Flight Simulator because I love those weather effects.
Mm-hmm.
And just the textures, and it just appeals. I always liked Flight Simulator from back, when I was a kid. Like, I mean, have you ever heard of the 80s? Is that something you've?
The
There was this
simulators?
thing. There was this thing called the 80s.
Oh, no, I
When
haven't.
people were around in the 80s, we had computers like Commodore 64s, and Flight Simulator came out on the Commodore 64 back in the 80s, and I thought it was the best thing ever, and that's what I have enjoyed that ever since. And when they released this new one, it was like next level. I thought, oh, I've just built these 3 PCs, and they can run 4K each one of them and everything, and I thought this would just be so good if I could have Flight Simulator on 3 networked PCs, producing those visuals with those weather effects and my built cockpit. That's the dream for me. I suppose you asked me at the start what I'm trying to achieve. That for me would be the coolest toy I could ever ask for. A Flight Simulator running that in 4K on 3 screens all around. But as I'm sure you know, and people into this will know, you can't do multi-screen properly on Flight Simulator.
Yeah.
At this point. And whether they'll implement that properly like X-Plane, who knows? So for the moment, I'm running X-Plane because it is so good at running a network, networked visuals. It does work. And then you get this incredible resolution. That just gives you that sense of immersion. When you run it at lower res, it feels less real. Yeah. Mm-hmm. What are you doing for visuals on yours? Because all I've seen with yours is these endless builds. These, like metal comes in, and then it becomes a proper, riveted cowling and stuff.
So use aerospace grade titanium.
Yeah.
No.
So what are you aiming for on the visual side? Are you projectors or?
Yeah, ideally I'll have 3 projectors, so I'll have like a curved screen around, and then you could like look basically all around you, and you'd have the side monitors in the enclosure, so you could look out the windows and stuff.
Yeah.
With Flight Sim 2020, that doesn't really feel possible yet, and I'm
No,
hoping they make it possible. Uh,
me too.
but we're kind of waiting for that. Right now, my display setup is like the whole simulator, air manager panel for instruments, just temporarily until I upgrade them, and then just like a monitor,
Yeah.
like a single kind of tiny monitor. So
That's something for people to bear in mind, because I think a lot of people go that route that you're at now. And you have put so much time into building the hardware. But the visuals are going to be really important to that end result, aren't they? So you have to also factor in, what am I building it for? What kind of screens, what kind of visuals am I building it for? And with me, where I had these old tellies, they happen to match, and that's great.
good.
So I saw Larry Jordan on YouTube did a tutorial on this kind of thing, and that appealed to me. Is it Larry Jordan? I think it's Larry Jordan. And very knowledgeable. And he'd set up these networked computers with 3 TV screens. And basically, that was the one time I followed someone's tutorial and set out to do, what they'd already showed me could be done. So I got these TVs and matched them up. So I've got the central one, and then 2 side ones. Just got a warning that we've only got 10 minutes left here. I didn't know there was a time limit. I thought that was for over 4 people. Anyway, who knows? So I set that up for my visuals, and it looks pretty amazing to have this kind of seamless view all the way around. But I was kind of frightened from the outset of doing monitors in the side windows, because I thought it would be less realistic, because there'd be a dead area between what you see out of the window and then what you see out of the front window. There'd be something over there missing. Does that make sense?
Kind of just like the mismatch between the like 2 monitors, kind of.
Yeah, because if you have a big screen as your front view, as I now have, I've upgraded the front view to a bigger TV. That's a different size TV to the other 2. So if you move, say, the left-hand screen and put it, perpendicular to you as a window, you've then got this kind of area that isn't covered by a screen. So I'm going to get around that this time, or I intend to get around that this time, by just building a real cockpit, as I said at the beginning of this. So that, that pillar that comes up in the 172 actually blocks out that whole area where there's no screen coverage. So in our loft spaces here, we've got a big slant that comes down, and it's a real pain. It's like, I would like to lift, you know what I mean? It's like, it's just inconvenient for flight simulation. What were they thinking?
Exactly.
So it limits how high I can put my TV screens, because I've got this kind of slant coming down here, and I want the screen up, say, this high. Hands out of shot. There we go. That high. I want my screen there, and the slant comes down, stopping the screen being there, and pushes it down to there. And you get all these kind of strange effects as you kind of taxiing around or yawing or whatever. And you get these, even in X-Plane, where there are lots of settings and ways of kind of changing how the views interact with each other. It doesn't feel quite right. So I've actually already put a lot of time, and I'll be putting a lot more time into that side of building the simulator, rather than, just the building the controls and the panels and all these kind of things. I want to kind of put a lot of time at this stage into the visuals, because for me, they're just the deal breaker. I don't want to end up with a cockpit without the visuals.
Yeah, definitely. I need to probably think about mine some more. You froze. That scared me. I'm sorry.
Well, all I would say is, the quality of what you're building and that enclosure is pretty realistic. And if you can find an affordable way of getting, proper wrap round vision in that. Projectors can be done in X-plane, and all matched up perfectly a bit, but that's not going to be cheap. I mean, that's something you would probably, you'd have to cost that out. But TVs also obviously isn't cheap, but it is something that's, maybe a bit more doable. You can pick up second-hand TVs and ideally at some clearance centre where you can get a batch of the same models, and then, they all have the same kind of colour cast and, match together well and stuff. But the difference when you get those big screens in place, you'll be amazed. If you've only experienced your cockpit on a small thing in front of you up until now, you're in for a surprise. You're going to love it.
Yeah. We have a projector down here, so I've had like the view forward, but never like to the sides, and so like I can't wait till the day I get like enough processing power to power the side monitors, and I can like look at the wing.
Yeah, it's so good to be able to do that. And as I said to you before, when I was doing my real lessons, and there was a stage in the circuit where you're kind of checking over there at 45 degrees if there's any traffic before you turn on to, turn downwind and stuff like that. You can actually do that in the sim. If you've got your side windows in the right place, it's pretty impressive. You can look around and check where the airfield is relative to the plane and stuff. And the way the mine works, it may not look that real to a bystander, but when you're in that seat and you can look that way and see the scenery where it should be and look that way, and, likewise, it's really convincing in your mind. I guess it's a bit like, virtual reality looks incredible as a concept to me. And I know loads of people have gone that route, and I may do one day, but I've tried it and I preferred my cockpit to virtual reality. I tried it in a flight center that had a virtual reality system set up in a proper fuselage of light sport aircraft. It cost an absolute arm and a leg for them to build this thing. But for me, I preferred my version of the cockpit, which was my first version at the time, because it was just, the resolution was so low, and obviously the controls are on screen. You can't touch them. It's not a tactile experience, and the resolution is so low, it takes away some of that reality. And I found it made me feel sick a bit as well, although it was impressive and it was fun. But when I came back to the cockpit, I realised that the Holy Grail really isn't that so much. It's more getting an awesome visual system, building a great cockpit where everything's in the right place and works. And then you'll have the best of both worlds. You'll be able to see all around you and feel every control. So that would be cool.
Yeah, that would be so cool. I'm really excited for like Vario and stuff, where you can like have virtual reality and then you're also your home cockpit and it can pass through and stuff.
I don't know much about that, to be honest. I have to Google that after this chat. But
there's actually, we talk about it a lot in the Sim Your Plane podcast we did. So that if you want to have a listen, it's pretty fun.
Yeah.
Just a fun little plug to you and the viewers too.
Yeah. There's a few things, if anyone listens to this at any point and they kind of want to chime in, that would be handy. But there's kind of, I find it sort of difficult to know, really, sort of setting up the screens, really what the best solution is to be aiming for, because I'm using X-Plane because you can network computers and you can get these wraparound views. And, it's brilliant when it works. And it's awful when it doesn't work, and that's also some of the time as well. But that's another story. But the problem is when you're trying to rig these things up in X-Plane, getting those sort of settings right is a difficult thing to do. You set your monitors, you think to yourself, right, well, I've built a PC that can do 4K, and X-Plane can output 4K. So, right, I'm good to go. I'm going to have 4K on all my windows. That's fine. But those computers are working flat out to try and do that. So you can't run them. Well, I can't with my spec run them at, with everything maxed out.
Mm-hmm.
But I can run them at a high level and it looks really good. But it's kind of occurred to me recently that I don't know that I'm wasting my time trying to build computers that can do this for visuals like this, because I think maybe the maximum resolution of the X-Plane visuals is lower than 4K. So you're wasting effort trying to build machines. We're going to lose this connection in a minute. No. Send me another one.
Okay.
Send me another one. I'll go. You're wasting your effort, basically. Trying to get these things running in 4K if the maximum resolution of the scenery isn't 4K. So it's actually got me thinking recently, maybe I should be running more TVs in HD instead. There's a cliffhanger. There's a cliffhanger for you.
We'll be right back after this word from our sponsor.
Yeah, just do a song or something.
Something like that. Maybe a little jingle. Man. Oh, is it flashing now? No, it's getting bigger a little bit as I move my mouse.
They want money.
Yeah.
Zoom wants money from us.
Nope. We'll be right back.
We're back. We're back in the room. I've actually talked so much, it's actually quite late now, isn't it? So,
yeah.
I guess we should move into the final phase.
Final phase of the...
It's like Lord of the Rings, the saga, isn't it?
Yeah. We get some nice joined clips together. I'm gonna have to do so much more editing than I was thinking I would. I was like, it's going so smoothly.
Oh, yeah.
All right.
It's nice to chat about it. I mean, it's I don't do any of the social media stuff like you, but if there's a demand for it, if people like to talk about these things and learn, then great. I'll maybe put more things up or whatever and be a part of it. But sometimes it's difficult to know if people are actually kind of interested or not. And, there's already people doing those things well anyway. And, I've been doing more like getting on with the work, and I want to kind of stay in that space rather than think about, I do production work for a living, so I don't really want to bring that into this building world. But it is, having said that, I enjoy just kind of talking to people, even on my little SkyShed account on Instagram, and just sharing ideas and stuff. And sometimes someone says, oh, that looks really good. And you think that's actually quite validating because, you're spending a lot of time building these things and, in your shared garage, cave, whatever.
Cave pilot.
And sometimes you look at it on a bad day and you think, oh, this is all rubbish. I want it to be better. Why am I bothering? And then sometimes someone will say something to you like, oh, I'd love to have built something like that. And you think, oh, that's really nice to know. I'm going on the right line somewhere. So sharing is good, and there is a good community out there as well. So, do you enjoy that side of it?
I do. It's fun to sometimes I'll be like, it's all falling apart. And I have my GitHub issues with oh, there's so many of them. Everything's broken. And then someone will be like, this is really smart. And I wasn't gonna, and your video made me want to go out and build a switch panel. And I was like, what? It has an impact. So yeah, it's always...
to you before. Your videos have done that with me. I mean, with the switch panel, I saw your switch panel one. And then in my kind of classic style, you inspired me to make one. And then I went off completely on my own and did it a totally different way. But that's fine too, because I still needed the inspiration. And that's what I get from when I tune into YouTube things and stuff like that, rather than I don't want to sit and sort of follow through a tutorial. But I watch things and just get inspired to have a go, and that's important too,
Hmm.
because you can do things on different levels, can't you? Some
Yeah.
people will be making things out of metals and beautiful machines and expensive things, and other people might be making them out of cereal packets. But it's all pretty good, to be honest. It's a good hobby, and it's good for the mind and skill set and everything else. But when I came to do my switch panel, that took forever because I saw online all these tutorials about people that were sort of 3D printing in white and then spraying black
Mm.
and then like rubbing them down so that the lettering and stuff then sort of came through in white. But my 3D printer can't dream of printing text that small. I mean, it just doesn't even attempt it. So I thought, how am I going to get around this? And I ended up doing it like the most basic way you ever could, which is buying tiny, tiny little white letter transfers. So I made my switch panel, got it all working, really happy with it, feels great. And then I just like hand labeled it letter by letter with tweezers and stuff. And oh my God, it took so long. It was, it was not like not the way that you see all the other people doing it
Mm.
on the internet, but it still got the end result. And I love the way that particular module looks. So once I get the rest of the cockpit sort of painted up and everything, I'll probably do a similar thing for, the flap switch module and the radio stack definitely and stuff like that. So it doesn't
Mhm.
all have to be done. There isn't an instruction book for this hobby, is there?
No.
There's a certain some people do things in predefined ways that work, but you can really just go all out to do it in whatever way works for you.
Definitely. Well, I think that I want to ask a few more questions. One
Yes.
of them I always like to ask is, what's your biggest tip to someone who is getting into flight simulation?
My biggest tip to anyone who's getting into flight simming is to go with what makes you happy. Don't chase ideas that aren't giving you pleasure, because you'll find all kinds of distractions. So you may get into the hobby and think, I'm going to buy a Cytec switch panel, and then you may get that and think, "Yeah, I need a yoke, and then I need a trim wheel, and then I need a couple of those generic radio stacks that you turn into different things." And before you know it, you'd have gone down the route of spending lots of money on parts and stuff. So if that's giving you pleasure because you don't have to build the stuff, do it. But if you start down that route, as I did by buying a few peripherals, then I thought, these are too plasticky for me. I don't like, I want more realism than this. So buying stuff wasn't making me happy. And then I discovered that making stuff was making me happy. So I kind of carried on with that. And then, you see other people doing things well, like you and other people and stuff. And then sometimes you think, I need to be doing better, or I need to be doing it a different way or something. But each person has their own, what's right for them, what's right for their budget, for the amount of time they have, and for what they're trying to achieve. And I think personally, like most things in life, it's balance.
Mm-hmm.
Not being too long in the workshop that the rest of your family hates you. Not being too long in the workshop that you can't pay the mortgage or whatever.
Mm.
Not spending, absurd amounts of money that you could be spending on real flying if that's what you want to do. And if you like flying a flight simulator, as I do, and learning about flying itself, don't immerse yourself in the building hobby so much that you never fly,
Mm-hmm.
because your happiness will deteriorate. And then, quite honestly, what is the point of the hobby if it's not bringing you fun? So I think my advice is just kind of enjoy it, go with the flow.
Yeah. And I think we have to sometimes remind people that it's a hobby. It's supposed to be fun. It's not supposed to be stressful or like a financial terror. But yeah, I really like that advice. I think it's the most like well-rounded advice I've heard for like all people, all flight sim enthusiasts, instead of just like home cockpit builders.
Yeah. Oh, that's
Yeah.
good to know. Thank you. Yeah,
Yeah.
but it's like you apply that all through life, don't you? With things, whatever you approach, do it in good balance, and with a view to what you're trying to achieve. And if you change and your circumstances change, then change the hobby along with it. Don't let things conflict.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Change it a lot. Yeah. If it's broken, fix it. That's it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Yeah.
Two more questions. One
Yeah.
just to get everyone angry. Airbus or Boeing?
I'd have to go with Boeing.
Mm.
Yeah, I'd have to go with that. The idea of, I mean, this goes back to real planes for me because I spent a lot of time on Stearmans and I
Oh,
got very
yeah.
attached to them. And it's like, oh, this hands-on experience, especially where they were vintage as well and everything. And then I knew some airline pilots that I worked with, and a couple of them were Boeing and a couple of them were Airbus. And they always had these arguments, like, which is best? Which airliner will take your airliner out of the sky? But they're sort of totally different experience. So your sort of Airbus pilots, so very systems based, they would always say, and there was so much learning around the flight management systems and all these different things, and you've got the little stick, haven't you, at the side, and so it's all a bit different. But personally, for me, I like the kind of controls in the middle, and I like to feel it more, and for things to be a bit more sort of tactile and sort of basic than computer, the computers, the fly-by-wire
Yeah.
computer systems and the complicated stuff. But I mean, planes are planes. I love them all.
That's true. I love all planes too. Anything that flies, it's
Yeah.
and is mechanical. I don't have a liking towards mosquitoes. On the other hand.
No, funny enough, neither do I.
uh, all right. Do you have any questions for me?
I don't think I
Hmm.
do.
Or
I mean,
anything else you'd like to talk about?
well,
Just
I mean, I would say I've always been interested with you in kind of, well, I suppose, what your sources are for all of this kind of information that you kind of pull
mm,
together. Because for me, one of the sort of big unknowns about trying to build a cockpit, in my case, it's difficult because of the loft, and so
yeah.
it's never going to be the real shape. But what I do want is the real measurements. I
Hmm.
want the seat to be the correct height and the window to be in the right place and the right size and all these kind of things. And can you guide me to where I can find out this information, because I haven't found it, up until now? You got any advice on where there are like actual definitive sort of answers on this stuff?
Dimensions wise.
Yeah.
Okay. So I actually compiled a huge GitHub. It's like 3 GB of pictures or something, or probably only two. There are a few videos, so, but I've taken like screenshots of anytime I find a particular part of an airplane. But there are also like dimensions you can find online of people who've like taken measurements. You can find them they're hard to find, but they're
Yeah.
there. Um,
Yeah.
and also my if you can't find a dimension, my favorite tool is it's called like a leaf image resizer or something. But
Yeah.
basically, you say like point A to B is this much. So if I have another measurement, what's that? So that one's another of my favorite. But
Mm.
I'll put I'll DM it to you, and I'll
Yeah.
also
Cool.
put it in the show notes at captainbobsim.com/15. We're on episode 15 already. Um, and you can see it right there. Um, any other places? Yeah, online, sometimes on forums. And the other one is the pilot's operating handbook, because they'll have the weight and balance sheet where you can find
Yeah.
a few things there.
Yeah, I've already gone there for a few bits and pieces. But yeah, that's good advice. I mean, given how far you've come, I think you've done what 3 or 4 different builds, haven't you, of your
Hmm.
fuselage now? So I suppose my question for you would be, having come this far, what do you wish you had done differently from the outset?
From like the beginning,
No,
or
not right
just
from the
like,
beginning, because you don't know what you're
okay,
doing right at the
yeah.
beginning. But if you could wind back, say, 2 years or whatever, which
Hmm.
wasn't the very beginning for you, was it?
No.
Do you think you've headed on the correct path all the way, or do you think you've deviated? And if
Hmm.
you think you've deviated, what did you do wrong?
I think I've mostly been on the right path. And that being said, like there's no perfect path because it's all like windy and crazy. But I think I haven't given up, and I think that's been the best thing for me because I can build something, and that's like putting in my best, and then after I build that, my best gets better, and I can work on other stuff. So I would say I wouldn't actually really change my path.
Oh, that's awesome. Tenacity is where it's at. That's absolutely the number one ingredient. Is just to not get too knocked back and to just keep
Hmm.
plowing on with it and solving every problem. And yeah, definitely, that's great advice.
Yeah, awesome. This is actually starting to look like a feature film. Uh,
It is. It is a
so
feature.
So yeah, and we have
You
all
know, I
the
charge by the hour.
well, you know I do too.
Oh no! What if your hour is higher than mine?
Well, how about we just draw a number out of a hat and or
Oh,
show
let's
it
just
on
call it
three?
even.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
even.
Just keep doing what you're doing, and it's just impressive. It's definitely impressive. You're doing it at the right age, doing it at the right time. So just keep being you, and don't be don't be taken for granted by anyone, because there will be people that see your skills and think, yeah, we'll have a piece of that. So just sort of stay smart and keep enjoying yourself.
Well, thank you. All right, I think I'll do my exciting little intro now.
Okay, I'll leave you to that, man.
All
It's been
right.
great to talk to you, Trevor. So
Yeah.
I'll sign off once and for all now. Maybe we'll catch up again a bit further down the line when we've built a few more things.
Yeah. All right. Thank you so much for Paul for being here and doing the podcast. It was an absolute blast to be on here. Uh, and if you want to see the show notes, it's captainbobsim.com/15. I'll leave a link, at least 5 links or something. It'll be absolutely crazy.
Make it 6 or 7.
6 or 7. Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
something like
I
that.
wouldn't go for any less than that.
And
Yeah.
yeah, but there'll be so many links. You can click them all. Make your Chrome freeze up a little bit. Uh, go th- go to the show notes, and we will see you in the next podcast episode. Thank you so much for tuning in, and have a good one. All right, that's a wrap.